and welcome to part 5 of the Mama You're Not Broken audiobook, written and read by me, Anna Cusack. This episode looks at fear, no sidestepping this one. It is a pretty scary time in world history to have kids, really, isn't it? We talk a bit more on our brain survival skills as we practice parenting, as well as covering climate, coronavirus, postnatal anxiety, unwanted harm thoughts, and more. Enjoy. I also wish to note that this chapter references Gandhi. When I wrote this book, I was unaware of the complicated nature of his legacy as both an agent of nonviolent resistance in India, but also as a historical figure who was racist against Black Africans for many decades. I apologise for any offence caused and will ensure this reference is removed in future editions of the book. Before we start this chapter, I just want to remind you that you can order a physical copy of this book and also see a full reference list at www.annacusack.com.au/book. You can also head to that website to jump into my membership for either $35 Australian dollars a month standard price or $25 if you're experiencing financial pressure or identify as someone from a marginalised group. The membership is a subscription which gives you access to a monthly group workshop or online circle, 2 days of private voice message mentoring per month with me, and also includes an active allyship contribution to pay the people behind the diverse voices you'll be hearing from in season 3 of the podcast for their time and expertise. There are no lock-in contracts and you can sub in and out at any time. If you're not up for the whole membership deal but want to support the podcast and its guests, you can become a patron of the podcast for $5 a month. Okay, let's get started. Chapter 4. Fear. As birth drew nearer, I thought I knew fear. When that date passed, I looked induction in the eye and sank into the stories I carried about my own birth and thought I knew fear. I hit transition, realised I couldn't run from what was coming through me, and thought I knew fear. Then my daughter arrived, and I realised anything I had ever been afraid of in my life was a tiny drop in an endless ocean of outrageously scary possibilities. I felt responsible for being her personal life raft, one that was floating dangerously close to many pointy things, ready to rip a hole in my calm exterior. As mentioned previously, researchers say that in the complex neural rewiring of pregnancy, our brains go through a major upgrade. This massive overhaul is the equivalent of our brains transforming from an outdated, clunky computer to a sleek, silver, latest model MacBook, and changes the lens through which we view our environment from focusing on securing my survival to our survival. While this topic could have a whole book to itself, the basic thing to know is that baby brain is indeed a thing, and it happens for a reason. At the same time your belly is expanding, neural, brain cell, connections, deemed irrelevant to baby raising get a heavy-duty pruning. This explains why I found myself unable to remember the PIN for my credit card and leaving the shops empty-handed, and very pissed off. The trade-off for this frustration is a long-term flourishing of neural pathways that enhance mothers' abilities in areas like emotional recognition, empathy, and collaboration, all of which are pretty useful areas for recognizing our children's needs and keeping them alive and well. Interestingly, neuroscientist Dr. Greer Kirschenbaum suggests that non-biological mothers, fathers, and caregivers have the chance to rewire their brains too, just by spending time interacting with and caring for their children. Biological mothers get a head start on this one, but it doesn't mean that they will automatically find parenting easier or more natural than their partners as a result. While I had noticed myself placing a protective hand on my pregnant belly, I had no idea just how hard this mother-baby survival instinct would hit home. 12 days after being brought up onto my chest in our lounge room, we placed her tenderly into the seemingly oversized newborn capsule for her first ever drive. I held my breath on every turn and roundabout, sending silent prayers skyward to please keep this baby safe. We passed the cross marking the place where a mother of primary school-aged children was killed when another driver tried overtaking irresponsibly. I reminded my husband that if I died, there was breast milk in the freezer and that the list of places he could source donor milk from was with the birth plan in the wardrobe. Home birth had allowed me to circumvent my fears about unwanted birth interventions in hospital. It dawned on me that it had also allowed me to skip what must be one of the most terrifying drives you could have, the one from the hospital to home with an hours-old baby. Needless to say, we didn't go out much in those early days. Partly this was because I wanted to allow time for the deep rest that is afforded to women post-birth in just about every non-Western or traditional culture you can think of. I was proud that my body had grown a human and was determined to spend time healing my body and get this breastfeeding thing figured out together. I'm convinced that thousands of years of mother care didn't happen by accident. The idea of staying in a place of safety to help keep my brain calm and allow my hormones to get back on track in a stress-free environment suited me fine. The world outside my front door was suddenly a daunting place, and home made me feel safe, with a side dose of cabin fever. Little did I know that things were happening inside me that meant I could generate my own fears out of thin air. The first time I attempted to bath my daughter, I had visions of dropping her under the water. The flashes kept coming each time I gave it a go. Sometimes in my visions, I would try to pick her up and she would slip through my fingers. Other times, I would hold her calmly under the water and watch her drown. I knew I would never do such a thing, but it frightened me to the extent I couldn't bring myself to bathe her alone for a long time. When we were out on our veranda, I would rest her bottom on the railing, cuddling her and looking out over the backyard. My uninvited imagination would kick in again, and I envisaged losing my grasp and having her slip the 3-meter drop to the hard dirt below. Other times, when we were close to the edge, I saw myself dangling her over the balcony in some homage to Michael Jackson's blanket fiasco. One night, when she was around 6 weeks old, I woke up in panic, screaming that my baby had become trapped under the blankets at my feet. The light hastily switched on and baby located in her co-sleeper bassinet. I vowed to never use a hot water bottle again. Was I the only mum who had thoughts like this, or had I lost the plot? The answers, it turns out, were no to both questions. Dr. Carolyn Boyd is a clinical psychologist who researches harm thoughts in mothers. She estimates that nearly all mothers have thoughts of accidentally causing harm to their baby or allowing it to happen. Around 1 in 2 mothers have thoughts of purposefully harming their child, even when they know they would never follow through on it. Dr. Boyd proposes that baby-related harm thoughts are part of our inbuilt safety mechanisms as we learn how to mother. For example, showing me how easily she could fall off the balcony, so to hold on tightly or step back from the edge. They are vivid and distressing for mothers, but for the vast majority of women, baby-related harm thoughts do not mean you are at any higher risk of accidentally or willingly hurting your child. I am thankful that these feelings came and went and didn't affect other parts of my life. Otherwise, I wasn't feeling too worried in those early days. Uncertain, absolutely, but true anxiety wasn't on my radar. My friend Jessie tells me that anxiety wasn't on her radar either, but that it crept up on her twice. Jessie had experienced postnatal depression and anxiety in the early months of her son's life, and after getting help from her GP, felt like she turned a corner when he was around 6 months old. At 18 months, though, she told some friends that she kept getting visions that someone would kidnap or hurt her son, and asked how they dealt with these kinds of worries. It wasn't until one of them suggested that with her history of anxiety, that she might like to check in with her doctor that the light bulb went on. Jessie now recommends to other mums that if anything isn't sitting right, to flag it with health professionals and people you trust to establish which side of the "this is just part of being a mum" line their feelings sit on. Likewise, expressing your concern for a friend's mental well-being is always more helpful than saying nothing. If they're ready to talk with you, they will, she says. And if they're not, they'll know you care when they are ready. Sometimes mum life starts footloose and fancy-free and takes an unexpected turn seemingly overnight. When my daughter was 4 months old, my friend's dad sent me a link to a video of Australian musician Missy Higgins performing Song for Sammy, a song she had written to her son. "Thought you might like this," was the message that came with it. Missy's familiar voice travelled through our speaker, describing in poetic detail the heart-expanding love she felt for her little boy. As she sang, I reflected on how my emotional scale was no longer 0 to 10, but minus 10 to 20. Her words penetrated my armour as she went on to sing about the wonder of watching her baby mesmerised by flecks of floating, sunlit dust. She spoke to me of the horror of feeling, rather than knowing intellectually, that every person struck by war, famine and tragedy is someone's child, and of realising just how much there was to lose now that she had become a mother. I want to say that I wept, but in all honesty, it was a full-blown ugly cry, where your nose runs and your eyes get all puffy and bloodshot. My life, like Missy's, felt like a pendulum swinging between ecstasy and terror. The song pierced through my heart with unexpected ferocity, and I can only imagine that if I'd had a son rather than a daughter, it would have twisted the knife even harder. The outside world had just started creeping back into my consciousness after an extended and delightful 4th trimester baby bubble. I looked at my girl's innocent face, the one for whom I was the ultimate place of security, and realised just how little I could do to keep her safe forever. 10 years earlier, just after finishing high school, I had moved inland to continue my studies at a regional university. Each holidays I would come back to Newcastle, see the orange cliff face of Redhead Bluff looming ahead, and know that I was almost home. Living away from the coast, I felt boxed in by land, as if I was in a room with no doors to escape through. Whenever I got the chance, I would head home and dig my toes into the sand at the beach, my happy place. Then one holidays I stopped going. It wasn't that I suddenly hated swimming or that the weather was rubbish every single day. Something had changed, and I just couldn't face it. When I was a child, the big rocks that the lifeguard tower sat on top of had a tunnel underneath it. We would crawl through and make sandcastles in the shade. Now, in all but very low tide, the sea surrounds the tower and the waves break against the rocks. Climate change has been my biggest fear for as long as I can remember. When I stood on my home beach as a uni student, I felt like I was on Easter Island, the one where they cut down every tree, then realised they had no way to survive without them and turned on each other. My thoughts at age 19 and single went something along the lines of, I wonder if my kids will get to see a sandy beach or if they will only know sea and land. Maybe I should dream of rural living rather than beachside homes. Not too far from the coast though, we'll need somewhere that rains a lot to fill our water tanks because drinking water will be scarce. Somewhere cooler though because mosquitoes and malaria will spread further down south. Enough land to grow our own food. Maybe if I get in quickly enough, my babies will remember the beach, but their kids probably won't. Actually, seeing as the world is ending, maybe I shouldn't have kids at all. We need less consumers. Maybe I should adopt? On and on it went, and by the time my baby arrived 10 years later, the world's prospective outlook wasn't looking much better. During my pregnancy, and until about the time of my song-induced flood of tears, I had done pretty well at tuning out to the possible fate of the world and my little family on it. Then, in the days after my ugly cry, and in the midst of drought, our water tanks ran dry. Long-term rainfall outlook was close to zero. A few months later, catastrophic fire warnings saw us leave our bushfire-surrounded village multiple times for days on end, even before the summer of 2019 had officially started. I was agitated and having difficulty concentrating. Before my baby arrived, I'd been nervous about getting postnatal depression and did an online mental health questionnaire to keep tabs on myself after the birth. I retested myself and saw my scores were worsening and surmised that postnatal anxiety was the most likely culprit. I booked a session with a counsellor, and with her support, I started peeking at newsreels about the upcoming global climate student strikes. This felt like something too big to miss, and I couldn't not be involved. I packed a bag and my baby and headed to the closest march, almost an hour away by public transport. Through the march, I gripped her tightly, breastfeeding and humming to soothe her, or maybe to soothe myself, amidst the noise. An environmental scientist and her friend walked alongside us, discussing how the lowest lying parts of the city We're about to tip over from occasional tidal flooding 20 days per year to being inundated almost 100 days a year. It felt like the end of the world was actually happening. The school kids around me all knew it. What was I thinking bringing a baby into it now? The week of Christmas 2019, our family of 3 found ourselves driving north-ish on dirt roads somewhere south of Sydney. The motorway had been cut by fire and the smoke was thick, with vision down to around 30 metres. We tucked in behind a small van labelled Fire Helicopter Support Vehicle and hoped that this meant fire crews would know to protect wherever that vehicle was, telling ourselves that it made us safer. We had woolen blankets in the back seat, ready to wrap around ourselves if fire approached, and 30 litres of water in the car, so that if we became stuck somewhere, I could still make breast milk for my baby. We were lucky the worst case scenario didn't eventuate for us, like it did for so many others in Australia that summer. I'm thankful I did not know the fear of a mother sheltering in place with her children in a firestorm. A month or so after the sun stopped glowing pink and the smoke haze finally lifted, the word coronavirus entered the collective consciousness. While shoppers panic-bought toilet paper and disinfectant, my friend volunteering on the breastfeeding counselling hotline was fielding calls from anxious mothers seeking help to increase their milk supply or even relactate. I'm thankful I do not know the fear of a mother staring at empty shelves where there should be formula. Like many others, my daughter's first birthday was spent in lockdown. I felt grateful to have birthed in April 2019, not April 2020, when restrictions on birthing women were changing day to day in ways that made very little clinical sense. I'm thankful I did not know the fear of a woman approaching masked birth without her support team, or that of a mother separated from her baby in NICU due to heartless blanket quarantine orders. Then, in the tumult of a climate crisis and pandemic, a police officer in Minneapolis knelt on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and the Black Lives Matter movement went global. I'm thankful I did not know the fear of a black mother watching her children step out each day into a world steeped in institutionalized racism. Soon my daughter will start daycare. I know she will be fine, but there is apprehension leaving her in the care of a little-known adult. I'm thankful I do not know the fear of a mother of a child with a disability who is facing her own mortality and has a lifetime of proof about the ways that the systems meant to protect her child have let them down. There are times when our kids hurt themselves or fall ill, and we fear for their physical well-being. There are also the big worries that are not so easily solved with a band-aid and a kiss or a plaster cast. There are sex and drugs and porn and body image and motorbikes that go too fast in wet weather. Did I mention that becoming a mother is bloody scary stuff? If, read when, you feel your fear rising, know that this is not a sign you aren't brave enough or that you aren't cut out for this. One thing I have learned is that we are far more resilient than we think. Fear can stop us in our tracks and, as I have done on many occasions, make us want to stick our heads in the sand. When we come up for air, fear can also be the impetus that we need to channel Gandhi and be the change you wish to see in the world. In a time of global anxiety, it feels to me like mothers are rising. While governments fluff around, mothers are on the ground doing the work. To me, the post is reading, "All mothers were summoned when George Floyd called for his mama," are one of the most enduring images and powerful messages from the May 2020 Black Lives Matter protests. Who is better placed than the central caregivers, who statistically are mothers, to raise children who challenge toxic masculinity, environmental sacrilege, and rampant racism? Singer Alanis Morissette, blogging during her experience of postnatal anxiety and depression following the birth of her third child in 2019, wrote that mothers and new parents were at the epicenter of our civilization and its evolution. Imagine your child's life as a still pond. Visualize the pebble that is secure attachment being dropped into that pond, and watch the ripples of love, respect, and compassion spread across all areas of the life that lies before them. See how these ripples spread across their relationships, the ways they serve their community, and the ways they contribute positively to their world simply by being unafraid to be themselves. When we feel safe, fully accepted and loved as we are, there is no need to make ourselves feel bigger by diminishing the worth of others. No need to war when dialogue would do the trick. No reason to pillage the world's resources when alternatives exist. This is the possibility our mothering opens up to the next generation. This is not a call to educate yourselves and your children in complex environmental engineering or delve into the underbelly of socio-economic policy since the arrival of white man as your before-bed light reading. It is an opportunity to see what you are already doing as powerful and embrace it, rather than being tricked into believing that your mothering is separate to the problems of the world at large that we feel helpless to change. Every time we acknowledge our worries and get the help we need, we model to our kids that strength lies in seeking support, not by going it alone. Every time we meet our children where they're at, not where some social expectation says they should be, we are showing them that their feelings and those of the people around them are valid and worthy of acknowledgement. Every time you speak in a friendly, respectful way to another mama who looks different to you, you are modeling respect. When we choose dolls, toys, and books that reflect different cultures and identities, we are transmitting the message that diversity is essential, not an afterthought. When we make the most environmentally friendly choices our budget will allow, we are taking ownership of the health of the planet that our children will inherit. When we leverage whatever level of privilege we have to raise awareness of injustices that others aren't able to or don't feel safe enough to raise, we demonstrate compassion. And when we vote, we share our hopes for their future as well as our own. Mama, you're not broken if you feel scared, but you are mistaken to feel powerless. Changing things takes time, but time passes anyway. We might as well do what we can, no matter how small our actions may seem. As we do the small things collectively, we rise together. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Please remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star review and share with anyone you feel may benefit from this content. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join me on social media at Anna Cusack Postpartum and head to my website www.annacusack.com.au to check out the ways we can work together. Please use the contact form on the website to inquire about having me run workshops with your client groups or book me for corporate speaking or professional development presentations. See you next episode.